Welcome back, everyone. Kalani here, and it's been a while since I posted. Things have been very busy. Good in a lot of ways, but I've been working. I don't know if you guys know this, but I'm also a music therapist and music educator, and I travel a lot, so I've been doing that. And getting back to this channel and posting here is something I'm very passionate about, so I appreciate your patience between posts. I just did a workshop here in LA, and I introduced some material from some forthcoming material that I'll be publishing, but right now it's just in a lecture form, hasn't been published yet. It relates to what I call music mindfulness. And this is something I've been thinking about for a long time because, as you know, I have a body of work through the Evolve podcast that has to do with mindfulness. It's a passion of mine. It's something I've been interested in for many, many years, before it was actually labeled as mindfulness, back when it was called Taoism or Buddhism or whatever it's been called over the centuries. And I've been interested in seeing where that practice aligns with my music practice. And as a musician, I believe, and I notice that a lot of what I do as a musician aligns with and supports what a lot of people teach as mindfulness. And I'll give you some examples of that. So I'm going to walk you through what I call music mindfulness, and for your convenience and mine, I use the acronym MUSIC, and so that's what this post is about. So I'm going to walk us through that and give you some things to consider and maybe discuss. Of course, I always appreciate your kind and helpful comments below. And here we go. So M stands for managing your thoughts. And this is it's a big topic, and I've created a lot of shorter posts about this. This relates to that idea of seeing your mind as your helper. And when I say mind, you could substitute the word brain, but the brain is actually the organ. The mind is what happens inside the brain. It's more of our thinking process. So when I say mind, I just mean our thoughts, essentially. Managing your thoughts is one of the first things you want to do to incorporate a practice of what we could put under the heading of mindfulness. And it has to do with a lot of aspects. I'm just going to rattle off a few of them right now. But one of those is identifying the type of thought you're having. For example, is it about the past or the future, which a lot of our thoughts are, or is it something in the present? That's one step. Is it what we would call a positive thought or a negative thought? In other words, what's the feeling attached to that thought? Is there an associated feeling, which there often is, or a quality? You could use lots of words, but it's basically identifying the thought type. And then maybe the relevance of the thought. Is it I could substitute the word imagination also. What you're imagining in that thought, is it relevant? Is it valid? Is it worrying? In other words, is it imagining something that you don't want to have happen, which is maybe not so useful to you? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. If it's causing you anxiety, I would say that that's not as useful as if it's causing you to think of a solution to a potential problem, and then you can check that box off and move on. So it depends on how you use the thoughts. So that's what I mean when I say managing your thoughts. And I don't mean to say you should suppress your thoughts. That's not what I'm saying. So managing just means identifying, kind of like you're taking things in, right? You're assessing what kind of thought is it? Is it about the past, present, or future? Can I use this thought? Is it a thought that I can sort of let go? And I've talked about this as your mind is like your helper. Your mind is going to be giving you suggestions. It's going to be showing you those movies in your brain. We're all sort of sitting in the theater of our mind, if you will, in a lot of ways. So managing your thoughts has to do with all of that. And like I said, we could go on and on about that, but that's what the M stands for. You is unbiased. And you could think of this as remaining neutral, being accepting. First of all, be accepting of your thoughts. It's perfectly human to have a lot of thoughts. That's normal. And sometimes I see people feeling like their mind is something wrong with them, like something's wrong with them because they're having what some people label as monkey mind, or they're having too many thoughts, or their mind is racing, and they think they need to do something to stop that. I would argue that you don't, because that's normal, and you don't want to make something normal into something that you think is wrong, or a deficiency, or something wrong with you. I would disagree with that position. However, what can you do? You can certainly allow the thoughts to parade by, and lots of people have talked about that, especially in meditation practices, allowing thoughts to float by like clouds or to parade by while you watch, and you don't get sucked into it, and you don't get carried away in the flow of thoughts. And that's, of course, supported by a lot of meditation practices that have been taught throughout the centuries. So remaining unbiased means we're not going to judge. So another word you could use there is non-judgmental. And we see that come up a lot in mindfulness teachings. So that's what the U is about. How do you do that? That's why we like to have these conversations, because it's one thing for people to just give advice, right? And that's generally what you see is online or in lectures or audiobooks or books. People will tell you what to do, but they don't necessarily tell you how to do it. That's what I'm interested in. How do we do that? Well, go back to step one. If you can manage your thoughts or identify the type of thought, like, oh, I'm imagining something right now about the future, which I don't know about, nobody knows, and it's a negative thought, it's a kind of what if, and then I put a bad scenario there, I imagine something, and now I'm worrying. If I can identify that happening, it helps me become unattached or to exercise an unbiased attitude, because I can then say, okay, well, that's not necessarily a valid thought or a valid scenario because it's not happening. That's not the reality in this moment. And my goal with all of this is to become rooted in the present. So accepting the thought, yes, I'm having a worrisome thought. Okay, fine. It's not a problem. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with me. All right. I hope that makes sense. So even just going through the simple procedure, the simple act of identifying the type of thought and then accepting it and saying, yes, I'm having a lot of thoughts right now. It's okay. Even just that can help relieve a lot of that tension and stress that we sometimes feel about having a lot of thoughts, or having thoughts that we might label as good or bad thoughts. We certainly don't want to punish ourselves for having different types of thoughts. You are human. Your mind is complex. It's creative. It's going to be having all sorts of different thoughts. Don't make that wrong. All right, that's a mistake, I would say. All right, the S stands for one of my favorite ideas of mindfulness, and that is also something I've talked about a lot in the other episodes, both on the podcast, on the Evolve podcast, and on this channel, and that is sensibility or sensational. And what that means is to have a sensational life. I don't mean sensational as in the woohoo, look at this, how fantastic this is kind of sensational. I mean based in your senses. All right, and we can play with that word a lot. Sensibility, sensible, sensational. But the takeaway from this, and the thing I want you to consider and maybe to adopt in your own practice, is the idea that if you root into your senses, you tune in to what you're sensing, using any of your senses, that act And those efforts will produce a grounding, because you cannot sense anything in the future or the past. All of your senses, whether it's touch, taste, smell, whatever it is, are happening in the present, are happening in the here and now. And of course they have to, because there's only one moment, right? As our friend Eckhart Tolle likes to remind us, it's the now. That's the only time there is. But what happens is we get pulled away from that with our thinking often, as we've already discussed. So tuning into your senses. I'll give you an example of meditation practices often ask you to focus on your breath, right? Very common, focus on your breathing. Why? Because that grounds you in the sensation of the physical act of breathing, maybe the sound of breathing, the feeling of breathing. But see, that's exactly what I'm talking about here. So that's one example of using your senses, but you could use your sense of taste. A lot of mindfulness teachers talk about mindful eating, for example, where you are really focusing on the texture, the smell, the taste of your food, and enjoying that moment to moment. That also relates to Epicureanism, which I'm a big fan of, which is really enjoying the quality of life, the feelings, the texture of life, if you will. Okay, so that's gets us to S. Now we need I, and I'm going to cheat a little bit on this one, because I'm going to talk about values, but the I stands for identify your values. Why is that important? Well, we want to live in alignment with what's important to us. So your values should be your map, the blueprint, the compass that is guiding your behavior, your actions, because your actions and your behavior become habits. Habits will largely define the quality of your life, because your habits are what you do every day. What you do every day adds up to what your life is, right? So pausing to identify your value, this also relates back to the very first thing about what types of thoughts are going to be valuable to you. How do you want to manage your thoughts? What's important to you? So deciding what's important to you, like one of my values is peace. I'm a peacemaker. I like to get to agreement and investigate things and pull things apart. Another value I have is wanting to be experiencing beauty. So beauty is important to me. It's important for me to have beauty in my life. So that is going to drive my behavior towards beauty. My behavior should be driven towards peace. My behavior should be driven towards community. So you have to decide what your values are, but whatever those are, identify them. And then the C, our final letter in the music mindfulness acronym, is, there's several words you can put there. One is create. And what I mean by that is do something that then is in alignment with your values, the value that you just identified. That you could also replace the word congruency, so act in a way that's congruent and consistent with your values. Another word that would be good to put there is curiosity. And why is that? Well, I believe that one of the ways that we can enrich our lives is by remaining curious. And I know many of you know that. Curiosity leads to novel experiences. It leads to in-the-moment experiences, because when you're investigating something outside of yourself, outside of your own mind, and I don't mean thinking and having thought, perseverative thinking. That's not what I'm talking about. When I say curious, I mean about things, about the outside world, being curious about your surroundings, which means, again, tuning into your senses. It means listening. It means paying attention. It means looking at things in a new way, in a new light. And I've talked about, there's a whole podcast on seeing as new, for example. So this idea would relate to that. Meeting people that you know, but seeing them as new, shedding your stored beliefs about things. Because here's the thing, when you think you know something, what is knowing something really? Knowing something in a lot of ways is like saying, okay, I'm going to put a checkbox on that thing and I'm going to stop investigating it because I know it, right? I know that person, I know that place, I've been there, I've done that. And that is kind of a slippery slope, because when you start doing that with a lot of things in your life, you stop being present. What you're doing is you're using your past experiences and you're using your past model of whatever that subject is, and it can be a person or a place or even an experience. That's a very human thing to do. We like doing that as humans. We chunk things together so we don't have to actually take in a lot of new information. But like I said, it's a double-edged sword. It's a slippery slope, because if we do that too much, then what we do is we end up not experiencing things authentically, because we're not curious and we're not, present in that moment, right? I hope that all makes sense. So that's the acronym of music mindfulness. In the future, I'll talk a little bit more about what other kinds of musical practices or what we can learn from music itself, because there are lots of things that we do as musicians that can actually inform our mindfulness practice. But really quick to review, manage your thoughts, remain unbiased as much as you can, just accept your thoughts, accept your circumstances, and always start from now, So that's about getting rid of the shoulds and coulds and would haves. Have a sensational life, meaning tune into your senses whenever you can. Feel the air on your skin, feel the feeling of being. Be grateful for the feeling of beingness and aliveness that you experience every single day. Tune into your senses. I is for identify your values. You need to know what you're about. You need to know what's important to you, and then create, be curious, and be congruent with those values as you take action, as you live your life each and every day, moment to moment, in the one moment. And I hope that helps you. It helps me to remember these points. And I'd like to know what you think about these. If you'd like to add anything, of course, hopefully of value, down below in the comments, that would be more than welcome. If you have any questions, you can always contact me through kalanidas.com. And I want to thank you for being here and tuning into the channel. Please like and subscribe, of course, if you haven't already, and share this channel with people that you care about. I'm Kalani Das. I'll see you in a future video.